That's true. Do you take this woman to be your right? Yes, there you go. All right. Good evening. Jim, can you open us in a word of prayer?
Our righteous Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and thank you for the opportunity for us to gather here tonight to study a portion of your word. And we pray that everybody here is nourished by what is taught from your word. And we pray, Father, that you will watch over us all, forgive us of our sins, and return us safely to our homes. In your Son's name we pray.
Amen. So, we've been going over the genealogies, and for the past couple of weeks we've been looking at individuals, particularly in Matthew's account. And what is one of the ways that Matthew's account kind of stands apart in terms of it being a genealogy of Jesus? What does Matthew include that draws our attention? The women in it, right? And we've been looking at their lives and attempting to see how their story fits into the narrative of Jesus. That when we look at Tamar, or when we looked at Ruth, that if it draws our mind back to their story, and there are parts of their narrative that fit with Jesus, right? Who recalls the story of Tamar? All right. And Tamar did what to make sure that the lineage would continue?
She acted like a prostitute and got with her father-in-law.
All right. So Judah had the two sons. Neither one of them were able to have children with her. And there was the idea that there was a third son, and he was like, well, I'm not going to give him to her. And so she found a way of making sure that he upheld his part of the promise. And then we looked at Ruth last week, the last 2 weeks. And in Ruth, what was the overarching term for what Boaz was to Ruth and Naomi? What was the term that was used? He was a redeemer, right? And so in Ruth's story, was there a bit of possible scandal in their relationship in terms of how she approached him in the evening and so forth, right? The potential. She was an outsider, all of these women, I guess except for Bathsheba. Say again?
And then Judah going to a prostitute to be with him. That's scandalous, as you could say.
Fits that. And so you begin to see, it's like, okay, so Tamar, this idea of continuing on the legacy. Ruth, looking for a kinsman redeemer, someone who will buy back the family. These women who have, on the outside, would be maybe questionable or challenging stories, and yet it fits within the genealogy, because once you start going through there, you think, oh, okay, I know these people, I know what they did. And then you get to Mary, and she's, we're told, with child, and Joseph is about to put her away privily, or quietly. And so we begin to see how these stories start to fit what Matthew is saying in the narrative. And so tonight, we're going to look at Solomon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. And so we're going to look at Rahab's story and start to see what also can we see about her that fits into the narrative of the Messiah. How many of us are familiar with Rahab? Okay. So Rahab here is, pardon me, just mentioned by Rahab. She's mentioned 2 other times in the New Testament. But her moniker, her nickname, her descriptor is going to be a little bit different. Here we go. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 31, it says, "By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies." Right? This is Hebrews chapter 11. This is the hall of faith. And in this hall, we have this reference to Rahab the prostitute. And so we're going to see that her background in some way becomes an example of God's mercy and God's grace and God's willingness to accept and to use anyone who acts of faith in this narrative. And so it says, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient. What is that a reference to? Jericho, right? And so we see in this simple sentence in verse 31 a whole encapsulated story that we're going to look at as well. But there's another reference to Rahab, and that's in the book of James. And in the book of James, he's talking about the idea of faith and works. That there should not be a disconnect between what you believe and how you live. And that your faith should be of action. It should demonstrate itself. And so in it, he gives the example of Abraham, our father, being justified by works when he offered up Isaac, his son, on the altar. Right? There's this moment, this offering. But in addition to Abraham, James also uses, in verse 25, "And in the same way was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way?" And realize what James is doing. James is looking at the entire history of Judaism, and he pulls out Abraham. Who is Abraham if you were a Jewish individual at this time? Who did he represent? What was his significance? Father Abraham, right? Had many sons, and many sons had father, and I am one of them. So are you, right? Significant. And in addition to Abraham, he brings out Rahab. And again, he describes her as Rahab the prostitute. That this telling of her past is not to shame her, but it is to remind us of what God can do when a person, as he says, lives out their faith. And so we're going to look at her story because of, not only is it used in Matthew, but because of the reference in Hebrews and the reference in James, that her story is of great significance. Any questions or thoughts before we jump into her story?
Back then, females had such a hard time making a living. If they wasn't married with family, I don't know how many prostitutes there were, but I can imagine there was many.
Yeah. And another thing that is when we think about it is typically in our modern, or at least within the American culture, we look at prostitution as a moral issue. And yet, similar to what you were saying, is that for a great many, for a great period of time, it was more of an economic concern. Not to say that it didn't have moral implications, didn't have challenges with it, but it was kind of the idea of like, how do you survive? And so we're going to go back to her story, which is in the book of Joshua. And in the book of Joshua, chapter 1, they are crossing over or preparing to cross over into the promised land. And the people pass by Joshua. He has been given prestige among the people. And the first city they're going to be coming to is the city of Jericho. And so it says, Joshua, the son of Nun. And what is the background of Joshua? How do we know his name? What was his significance? Moses' right-hand man. And he was also what? One of the two spies who went into the land of Canaan and came back with a favorable report. Right? And so he comes and he sends two men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. Right? This is the city. We're going into this new land, scout it out. Someone had pointed out one of the interesting things is that God had already said, I'm going to give you this land. Right? And so you wonder, like, is this just to get verification? Is this to get a ground understanding of what it looks like? Because in terms of the battle that's going to be fought, any military strategy you would have thought would have been on the table, this was the strategy that was not on the table. And so they're going to look at Jericho. They went and they came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and they lodged there. Right? This is our kind of our first introduction to her. And so,
Have you ever kind of pondered about how did these spies come across the prostitute? You know, when you kind of think of it in a vain sense, were they out looking for, you know, something else and happened to come across her, or
No, I
were
mean,
they
they
out
just
looking?
found up in the seedy part of town, and that's when you go into a strange town, you're gonna wind up in dark town, so to speak. And they just can't
come
point it out, but God has his hand, because they knocked on the door of who God wanted to use,
yeah.
even though she was.
Because you normally think if somebody's going to prostitute, they're only going to prostitute primarily for one reason,
Yeah.
and that's to do business with her.
Cookie recipes and stuff like that.
Reading this, you know, and thinking, were they going there to steal
Well,
business, or was
I could see how that may be an idea, but in the text, things that would kind of give me pause is, one, they were commissioned spies going into a foreign land, and then also in terms of the time frame, that they come into town and they're already known to have been there by the king's men. And so in terms of the time frame, it seems too compressed to come into town and to think to themselves, hey, we're on shore leave, let's see what we can find.
what Wayne said kind of made sense that, you know, you're new in town and you may end up in a seedy part of town.
Well, and we're going to see how her position plays into how she's able to get the men to go away. Because this would be a place where anonymity, not being known, would be a value, and where the how can I say, the customer management relationship would be one of a simple transaction and then no more kind of ideas. And so they come into this house with Rahab, and it tells us that it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. Right? That even though there is this idea of we've come in, we're spies, we're trying to hide, it's been known. And so it's told the king of Jericho, men have come. And verse 3, then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. Notice this phrase right here, bring out the men. What does that kind of imply? When would you say bring out the men? Where would you be standing? Outside the door, right? Bring out, right? So they're not going in to search it out. They say just bring it out, right? You're prostitute, you're part of Jericho, you have no allegiance to these other people, right? Just share them. For they've come to search out all the land. Now, before we go on to her response, I want to ask a question. Does that phrasing sound familiar? Remember Sodom and Gomorrah? Is it Genesis? I thought I had, when God sends to Lot, man, Genesis, was it 18? No. Yeah, okay. God meets Abraham and tells him, I'm going to basically destroy Sodom. And then there's that whole haggling, right? If you find so many righteous people. And so they get there. Here we go. And so Lot sees these men sleeping outside. He says, hey, come to my place. And they're like, no, we're going to sleep out in the court. And he's like, no, you don't want to be here. That's a bad part of town. You don't want to be there. So they bring him in, and they pressed him strongly. They turned aside, entered his house. He made a feast, baked under the bed. They ate. And before they laid down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people of the last man, surrounded the house. They called Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us. Right? And you think about the similarities, right? You have people being sent at night to spy out an area, finding a host who is righteous enough to put them up and to shield them, right? Same thing with Rahab. And so you have this overlay of the story of judgment that's happening. What was the argument that Abraham was making about Sodom? He says, if you can find what? If you can find one righteous person, and God says, okay, if I find those righteous people, I won't destroy it. Think about Jericho, right? Not only did they find Rahab the prostitute, they found faith, right? In this whole city, she's the one that they end up at. This idea of without faith, it's impossible to please God, but you must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him, right? And so you have this callback to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. All right. So they say, bring out the men searching of the land. Then we're told she's hidden them, right? So she's taken them, hidden them. Her response, true. Right? That's a great response. The men are here. The men have come. Like, it's true. Can't deny that, right? They had witnesses. They had stuff like that. They did go, but I didn't know where they were from. I have no connection to them. Right? That's not my interest. And when the gate was about to close at dark, and this kind of goes back to your idea of the time compression. When the gate was to be closed at dark, the men went out. Right? They were here, not a problem. We had our transaction. They went away. I don't know where they went. But then she adds this. Pursue them quickly. Right? So you're the guard. You're the one who's trying to find it out. You're standing at the door. Bring out the people. You're like, oh yeah, they were here, but they're gone. And you're like, well, let me check it. Let's go in. Let's look around. She goes, no, you got to go fast because when the gate was about to close, they left. You have a choice. King wants you to find him. Do you meander here, where she has no loyalty to him? There's no reason to doubt her. Or do you go and try to pursue? And overtakes them. She says, you need to go so you can overtake them. Right? The time pressure.
Basically, she sends them on a wild goose chase.
She does. She does. And she uses that pressure of you got to act now to do it.
But she wanted to go ahead and leave and not fiddle around and spend more time there. In other words, leave now, and you'll catch the guy when she knows she still got him on the roof.
Yeah.
Get rid of them.
I do like the phrasing goes, the woman had hidden them, and then she brought them up on the roof and hid them, even in between her telling these other people what to do. So she tells them that. But we're told they're up on the roof, and she hid them with stalks of flax. Flax was used to make rope. It was used to make, I'm going to say like cloth. And so in addition to, this may be a side gig, a side way of making extra income.
If you think of it in today's terms, she may have been good at hiding men because no telling how many women showed up at her looking for their husband.
Yeah.
Kind of like, going to the bar to go find your husband.
But she hides them underneath these stalks of flax, laid in order on the roof. This was the idea of drying them out. And so we're told the men pursued them after the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. Right? They took her word. They went out. And the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. Right? City gates are shut. You got a moment of reprieve. Then it says, before the men lay down, that's the idea of going down to sleep, she comes up to the roof and she says to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt before you.
How did she know?
Because she listens. Right? She's going to tell us what she heard that caused her to know this was the case. Right? And notice the definitive nature of it. I know. There's not a doubt. Right? She sees them. She knows who they are. She hides them in the back of her head. This whole thing's planning out. Not only do we find that she has the faith, but the fear of you has fallen upon us. Now, the reality is that the fear the people have is not necessarily the Israelites, but the God whom Israel serves, because everything that she's going to be talking about was because what God had done for them. And so all the inhabitants of the land went away before you. Now imagine you're a spy. You're going into the land, and you hear your enemy tell you, yeah, we're shaking our boots. We're scared. We have no defense. And then here's what she says. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt. How long did they wander in the wilderness? 40 years. How long ago would this have happened? 40 years. Right? And I was thinking about that, and this might be like maybe a segue, and if I use this as a sermon at some point, just pretend you forgot. But think about that for a moment, that for 40 years, they crossed over, the Egyptian armies dealt with, and the people on the other side of the river hear that, and they are freaking out. Like, we have no defense against that. If they took down one of the major powers of the Egyptians, no hope. And then you've got to wait 40 years for them to start moving again. Would you think to yourself, why did it take so long? Why, like, you did that in just like one night. Why is it taking you 40 years that now you're showing up? And does anybody know the answer? Why did they wander 40 years?
It was to kill a generation or two. Yeah.
The Hebrew writers, Hebrews 3 and 4, talks about because of your unbelief. That 40 years, everybody was freaking out, thinking they're going to conquer, they're going to do it. But the people themselves were thinking, we can't do it. We're not strong enough. We don't have all the stuff that we want. Who put you in charge, Moses? Right? Complain. But it was kind of that idea, is like as Christians, God has given us so much, provided us with so many promises, so many blessings, so much grace. And people look at us going, if that's the God you serve, why aren't you moving? Why aren't you doing something? And sometimes it's the same reason, unbelief. It'll be more fleshed out if I do a sermon like that. But she hears this when we heard that. But also, she says, what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. This is told in the book of Numbers. Numbers 21. Israel is moving along, and they are having to deal with the Canaanites. And so they have this one king, and they send messengers to him, to the king of the Amorites, and say, can we pass through your land? We're not going to turn into your fields or your vineyards. We're not going to drink the water of a well, right? We're not going to mess with your stuff. We just want passage. We'll go by the king's highway until we've passed through your territory, right? That's all we need. We just left bondage. We're just wanting to pass through. And he's not going to allow them to do that. He gathered all his people together, and he went out against Israel to the wilderness, came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. Right? They weren't a nation at that point. They were just trying to move along, and yet he tries to take advantage. And sure enough, Israel defeats him with the edge of the sword, takes possession of all his stuff. And then the same thing with another king. When they lived in the land of the Amorites, king of Bashan came out against them, he and his people. And God says, don't fear him, I've given him into your hand. So they defeated him. And she's telling him, we heard what your God did. Nobody expected you guys to be able to do that. You did, so I know Lord's given you the hand, and that fear has fallen upon us. She goes on to say in verse 11, and as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted. Right? Because now they've crossed the river, they've taken care of these lands, and they're just, if you look at a map of it, you start seeing this progress. Our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. And then this line right here. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. What was her religious background? What was she? She wasn't an Israelite. She was a Canaanite. Right? All their gods, all of their deities, all of her history, all her traditions, all her culture. She's like, I saw, and I heard, and I believe. And what's interesting about how she says it, the Lord your God, he is God of the heavens above and the earth beneath, is this is similar to what Moses says in Deuteronomy chapter 4. when he's talking about faith in God. He says, you're going to go into a land, and God's going to drive out before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land for inheritance, as it is this day. Therefore, know today and lay it in your heart that the Lord is God in heaven above and earth beneath. There is no other. And so she's saying, hey, I've seen it, I believe it. Is that an example of faith? Right? Now the idea would be, is I know you're an enemy, I know what your mission is, I know what you're capable of. I have nothing to fight back against that. And so what do you do in that situation? You try to figure out how can I make a relationship? So what does she do? Verse 12. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, right? So come in, she's aware of who they are, she's aware of who they represent, and she's thinking, I'm going to protect them. It's in my best interest. But she's also not selfish in that aspect. Because what her request is going to be is going to show us a broader desire of her own heart. He says, as I have dealt kindly with you, you also deal kindly with my Father's house. Right? She doesn't just say, save me, take me with you. The whole Father's house. Which kind of goes back to the idea of how her occupation may have been viewed. Right? In a lot of cultures, there's been ostracization, you're marginalized, and yet she still has these familial relationships, so it may have been viewed in a different idea. And so she says, I dealt kindly with you, deal kindly with my Father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and our lives from death. Did she know destruction was coming? She had no hesitation. And she also knew that she wanted more than just herself saved. And so she says, make me this deal. Right? Look at all who she's trying to bring in. So the men say to her, our lives, or our life for yours, even to death, if you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully to you. So what's their response to her desire? Agreeable under what condition? She doesn't tell. So now you're thinking, okay, I can't tell, so how am I going to get my family? How am I going to get my brothers and sisters? How am I going to get them in the house? Right? But she agrees. And then she lets them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall that she lived in the wall. I had to look this up because sometimes whenever I think of walls and defenses, my mind instantly goes to medieval castles. That's just my frame of reference for castles. But that's not necessarily how everything was built. But here the author tells us her house was in the wall. She had a window that allowed them out. And so she lets them out.
And I think if you lived on the wall, it was considered kind of a lesser,
Like a social position.
not a social position, but you're not living in the better part of the town or in a better neighborhood. It's more kind of
Say again? Okay.
Yeah, the wall,
Here's all the traffic outside of her window.
I read one time was that if you lived on a wall, it wasn't considered one of the more desirable.
Okay. All right.
David, we had a man here named Ryan Sims. He did a whole deal from start to finish of the Bible, and when he covered this, he also made a trip to the Holy Land, and they, archaeologists or geologists have found where the city of Jericho was.
Yeah.
And there was this section of wall still standing, they had a window there, and they believe that was Rahab's, place.
Oh, that's cool. I'd heard about the discovery of the burned of the walls. I didn't hear about that. I have to look that up.
Yeah, but hers was
If they
not,
destroy-
it was not, everything was burned around it, and that part was.
Yeah.
If the walls fell and she was saved, then that part of the wall where she lived probably had to still be standing.
Oh, maybe. I'll have to look that up. All right, so we're at the part, she lets them down from the wall, right? Transactions completed. Right? She had the offer, they accepted, she lets them out. What are your thoughts if you were her? Are they going to keep their end of it, and are they going to be able to make it? Right? She's invested.
And I better go find my family.
Yeah, I better go find my family. All right. So she tells them, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you. Right? She's already sent them out. She says, go into the hills, or when they come back, they're gonna find you. And she goes, hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Now, interesting. I want to say it's in the first part. He tells the camp to, I just saw one second. Yeah. He says, pass through the midst of the camp, command the people, prepared provisions, for within 3 days you're to pass over the Jordan, right? So her timing fits with what they're planning. And so she says, go there. Where was I? 16. Okay, thank you. Yeah, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you. Hide there 3 days until pursuers have returned. Then afterward, you may go your way. Right? She knows the protocol. Here's what they're going to do. Here's how it's going to work. You need to go out. She's wanting to make sure they succeed. They survive. They say to her, we will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you have made us swear. Right? There's a reason why we're not going to be held to it. Behold, when we come into the land, talking about the army, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And you shall gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all in your father's household. Right? She's letting them down through a cord. They say, you need to have everybody in here. You need to have this cord. Then, verse 19, if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own hand, and we shall be guiltless. Right? She had said, help me save my father, my mother, my brothers, my sister. They said, okay, we'll do it. They said, you need to have them in the house. And then they're leaving, and they say, just so you know, if they go outside the door, it's not on us. They're not in the house. And so the idea is, not only does she have to get them there, she has to keep them there. Can anybody recall another time where you had to be in the house and you had to stay in the house when there was judgment coming? Passover. right? Paints the doorpost with the blood of the lamb. Right? You start to see these parallels. And so they say, we're going to be guiltless if they go out. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. Right? If something happens to them, it's on us. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear. Now, the mission's going to succeed. It doesn't seem that she broke her oath. But the reality is, even if she had, God would still have found a way around, and they would have conquered Jericho, right? That's just what he had promised. And so she has this charge. You need to go get your family. And she has a place where they need to be. And it's not just any house. What house is it? Her house. How do you know it's her house? Has the red cord on the outside, right? It's identifiable. And so she says, according to your words, so be it. And I think this next part is so relatable if you were in that situation. How many of us go to the grocery store because we know we need something? We go to the grocery store, we end up buying all sorts of stuff, come home, and we're like, oh, I've got the one thing I went there for. Right? Worse if you wrote a list and you left it at home. You're like, oh, that was the list I should have brought.
No, it's even worse when you bring the list and you know.
Oh, that's true. You bring the list and you've got it in your hand. Okay. So according to your words, so be it. She sent them away. They departed. And notice what she did. She tied the scarlet cord in the window. When did they tell her to do it?
It just had to be there when they came back.
When we come, have it in the window. Right? Whenever you want, just as long as we get here, we want to make sure we see it. When did she put it up there? I am not messing with it at all. I am putting it in the window.
That may be when they get the whole red light district.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't have red lights back then.
Although I do wonder what people were thinking if that was a cord that was long enough to let people out the window, if they were walking around and going like, wait, why does she have this cord out the window? So we see in verse 22, they departed, went into the hills, remained there 3 days until the pursuers returned, right? That's what her plan was. Here's how you're going to succeed. Pursuers searched all along the way and found nothing, right? She knew their path, knew their procedures. The two men returned. They came down from the hills, passed over, came to Joshua the son of Nun, told him all that had happened to them. And they said to Joshua, truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. Right? They take her words, convey them to him to let them know. And so we have the situation, right? And we're kind of left in suspense as you're reading along the story, if you weren't already aware of it, wondering, is she going to keep quiet? Is what was the phrase, World War II, loose lips sink ships? Right? How's it going to work? And then we come to the actual battle. Chapter 5, this is where the angel of the Lord's army. And so it tells us Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. No one went out, no one came in. Right? The whole city is locked down. And then God gives the orders. And they're circling around, right? Who had a window in the wall? Rahab. She's watching. All right. And
Yeah, you must have, didn't they have like 1 million people going around the city?
they had a huge number.
So they weren't saying a word. So the people in
I
the
doubt
city,
seriously it's limited children. It's
well,
probably
but
just
the people in the city must have thought, what is going on
mock them?
I don't remember. It could have just been VeggieTales.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even if it was just the men and not just the women, children, and the men, it still would have been roughly 500,000 people.
Yeah.
And even if it was just the priests blowing the horns, that still would have been like 1,000 people blowing loud war horns.
Yeah. When
Terrifying.
and just because we're talking about, here's the battle plan, right? But it's one of those things, like, we've heard the story of the Battle of Jericho so often that sometimes we don't necessarily think about how absurd that must have looked in terms of the people of Jericho looking out, or even the people of Israel in terms of their walking, thinking, I know military plans, and this doesn't even seem to make sense. Well, the last day, once a day, and then on the seventh day, 7 times. But it's one of those things where when those walls fall, nobody can say, look what I did. Look, you didn't do nothing. Hebrew writer says, by faith, the walls fell when they were encompassed 7 times.
I was making it up in their heads like, oh, somebody was, doing something in the middle of the night, but hammer or something, chisel away at
Oh.
important bricks.
And so they march around 7th time, they blow the trumpets, they shout, the city has been given to you. And then here in verse 17, he says, everything is devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. Right? That this command is now given. What's friendly fire? The topic of friendly fire. Right? It's just an accident. Sometimes they'll use the nice euphemism of collateral damage. Right? Sometimes there's accidents and stuff like that. But think about in terms of what is happening in terms of the building, the walls, what is happening in terms of the chaos of everything being attacked, and yet still preserved, right? Still protected in this process.
That may go back to what Steve's comment about the guy said that a piece of the wall was still there and the window. And maybe that was the only part of the wall that remained standing.
Didn't succumb to it.
Where her house was built into.
And so Joshua tells the 2 men who had spied out the land, go into the prostitute's house, bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her as you swore to her. Right? So we know the story. We have that intervening period of we wonder, okay, what's going to happen? Is it going to work? And then we're told, so the young men who had been spies went in, brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. Right? That's what she wanted. I want my family safe. She got it done. Right? They brought out all her relatives, put them outside the camp of Israel. Like you wonder about their relationship now with Rahab. Right? What they thought about her before or during. And then now this recognition of that we're safe because of her. We're safe because of what she was willing to do. And so it says in verse 25, but Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive, and she has lived in Israel to this day because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. And so we look at her story, and what are some things that we see in this narrative of her? God uses everyone. Right? Doesn't matter your background, doesn't matter your position. Jesus said he came to seek and to save the lost, right? God says without faith it's impossible to please him, but you must believe that he is, and he's rewarded those who diligently seek him. Here we have a story in this big city that's going to be destroyed, dedicated to destruction, and these 2 spies find a woman of faith in a most unlikely place? Was it coincidence? Would we think it's just coincidence? Well, good thing they found Rahab's house. How lucky are they? Right? Let's all, well, never mind.
A lot of people that are not faithful, they look at Christians as holy, non-sinful people. And I tell people just the opposite. If God can save a sinful guy like me, he can save you or anybody else. But to get people to come to the church, you just gotta convince them that we're not just a bunch of holy roller good people. We're sinful people. We're all sinners, but God has redeemed us, and that's the beauty of the blood of Christ.
Yeah.
If you don't get baptized, you're not part of it.
You know, this is kinda off a little bit, but you have that wall that's standing there in that window. There's a beach house down there in Crystal Beach on Bolivar. When I came, the whole thing was washed away. That house had a picture of Jesus. The house was gone, the wall is still there, and the picture is still there.
Oh, really?
You can go in and see it, yes. But all of them are gone. Now, why, you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
was a wall.
Yeah, you always see stories like that where something burns down in just this one place with the.
Still there,
Also, notice what she was willing to do. She was willing to risk everything on faith. These two spies, they had no loyalty to her. Just this matter of, are you going to hold your end of the bargain up, right? Her faith was in the God who she knew was. And similar to, when we talk about our faith, although we have faith in one another, we draw strength from one another, the ultimate faith we have is in God in terms of what He's provided, who He is. Because that's what the basis of all the promises are, not on us. Say again?
I imagine back in them days and today, once a prostitute, always a prostitute, but I think she had already changed. She'd probably done some bad things in the past. Because she needed the money, she didn't have a husband, but you can tell that she loved her family enough to save them all.
Yeah. And then we see in her story that not only did she live in Israel, but why are we talking about her right now? She's in the genealogy, right? She was grafted in. And so if you are a Jewish individual of the first century reading through Matthew, and you see, oh, here's this Gentile who had faith, right? Who is Jesus going to start pulling in? The Gentiles, right? And so you start seeing how her story, has notes and flavors of other stories that seem to demonstrate the ultimate story of Christ, right? The judgment that's coming, the place where security is found, this desire to reach out and to save, right? All of these things inherent in just this one story that Matthew says, Boaz by Ruth, right? And so her story, again, is said both in James and in Hebrews as an example, right? This one story way back in the very beginning still resonates. What's also interesting is when they, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying, Wayne, is in terms of her background, that if you look into the Jewish writings, from what I was able to see, they kind of sanitized where she wasn't necessarily a prostitute, she was an innkeeper. Because it's a little bit more palatable, I guess, because especially in Israel, prostitution was not, that was a what's it called? Capital offense. And yet in the New Testament, there's this, no, this is who she was. But that's not who she ended up being, right? It was just a temporary thing, similar to all of us, right? We're not defined by our past, we're defined by who we are in the present in Christ. And amen for that, right? All right. Any questions, thoughts, comments, observations?
How was she tied, can you go back to where she was tied into his, genealogy?
Yeah.
Which,
We have, here we go. Nahshon, the father of Solomon. Solomon, he was one of the guys in the generation that came out of Egypt. Or no, Nahshon was, I think it was.
Rahab was actually Boaz's mother.
Yes.
The father of Boaz.
Well, and this kind of goes to the idea of the telescoping. If you remember when we talked about the genealogies, how sometimes they might skip generations because there is an idea of, well, how does this work in terms of a timeline, considering where Rahab would have been at the beginning of entering into the nation, and then with David.
She could have either been a mother or grandmother or something.
Yeah.
Also, they lived at such long ages at part of the times.
They do, and I think there's one place where it talks about how many years it was between these two. So it could have been if there was long enough periods.
Probably some of those lifespans for at least 100, 120.
Possibly, I haven't seen. You go through the kings and they die so young, you're like, oh, I can't tell who's going on.
Solomon was the father of Boaz. And Nahshon was Salmon's father.
Okay. All right. Can you close us out in a word of prayer?
Dear Lord, we thank you for this time that you've given us in the middle of the week, Lord, to come here and to study about the lineage of Jesus and showing how your presence is throughout the whole Bible, Lord, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. God, that it's always refreshing to see that you will use anybody in any state that they're currently in, Lord, that you will help guide them to the righteous path and to show them the way, Lord, and that you will, no matter how broken we are, that we are usable in your will. And God, I pray that you would be with us as we go throughout this week, and that you will remind us as we come across people that God can use them and God can use us just as he used these people that we're reading about, Lord. And God, I pray that you would open the doors that you want us to go through, Lord, and that you would shut the ones that you don't want us to go through, and that you would allow us to put your will before our own. God, I pray that you would be with those that are under the weather, that are needing your healing hand, Lord, and I ask that you would provide us wisdom as we go throughout our life. And it's in your son's holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.